cyber panel. Sitting to my left, Geoff Brown, New York City CISO, Head of Cyber Command, if that's your full accurate description. Pleasure to have you here. Sean Kanuck, former National Intelligence Council Officer 2011-16, now head of a very prominent consulting business, Exodec. And Neal Pollard, Chief Information Security Officer of UBS Bank here.
Professor at Columbia.
And Adjunct Professor at Columbia, which I now recall. So great to have you here. This panel is all going to be about now a focused and very robust discussion around cybersecurity, its impact in the city and the broader national and international context, and really how we deal effectively with crises. Global Dream Forum is all about how we confront strategic challenges and ensuring that we have the toolkit and the policies to hand in order to make sure that we effectively handle any challenges that occur. Just so you're aware, this is on the record. This is going out live streamed, which I hope your team informed you. There we have multiple sort of media and thousands of people registered online watching this as we speak all over the world. So great coverage here. Feel free to speak openly. We're all about a frank, open discussion. So starting off, I want to go one by one with each of you here as to what you see as the key challenges in the cyber domain right now. Obviously, we'll start with Geoff here, particularly around coordination of multiple agencies on a local, city, state, federal, and even international level when you're confronting crises. There is a perception from the outside that either you are firefighting on a constant basis and not able to actually strategically set up frameworks towards collaboration. But on the other hand, we're sure that things are happening. We do know New York City is pushing ahead in terms of being if not one of the most national prominent cyber commands and driving a coordinated effort. And I think that's really, really critical to understand. We'll then move on to perspectives from Neal here regarding the financial services view, particularly as a UBS and Neal himself being a key stakeholder in the financial services industry. And then Sean's going to particularly focus in on transportation, energy, and utilities. But we will get very granular as quick as we can. This panel will run to about 9:10 a.m., so plenty of time. We'll do about 30 minutes entre nous, as we say, and then we'll open up to some Q&A from the ground here. So please, fire away and give us your perspectives. Geoff.
So good morning. Thank you very much for having me here, and happy to speak about the great work in New York City that we're doing addressing cybersecurity and the risk associated by that threat vector. So before I give you a quick understanding of how we think about the threat landscape to your question, it's good to explain very quickly how this municipality is approaching cybersecurity. So oftentimes as the CISO for New York City, I get asked the question, what is New York City Cyber Command? New York City Cyber Command has two primary missions. Our first mission we think of as our enterprise mission. The enterprise mission is to defend the technology that delivers services to New Yorkers each and every day. Keep in mind the New York City government is roughly 340,000 employees. There's over 100 different ways, different offices, departments, et cetera, different ways where services are delivered to New Yorkers. So it's a pretty big apparatus that each and day operates successfully and must each and every day operate successfully. So our mission is to defend all of that technology that delivers those services. The second mission we think of as our public-facing mission. So uniquely in New York City, we've made a decision. We've made a decision that cybersecurity is a public safety issue. It's an essential service, and everything we do in order to help New Yorkers navigate away from threats that they encounter in their internet lives, everything we do needs to respect the values that are part of the city. One of those values, of course, is privacy. So I think speaking a little bit about the public-facing mission gives you a perspective on how we think about the threat landscape. There's an incredible amount of discourse when you think about cybersecurity globally. As a city, we are very mindful of the types of operationally impactful events that other U.S. cities have experienced over the course of last year. We're very mindful of that. We have a threat intelligence program where we learn about those things and we apply that learning to our defenses. We're also very mindful of the threat to decision-making that we see through influence operations. This is also a big piece of the cybersecurity landscape, and there's a lot of literature out there that we consume and we help advise around that understanding. Uniquely, though, in New York City, as I highlighted the public-facing mission, we think cybersecurity should be served in many ways to the individual, to the person. You know, when it comes down to it, enterprises, you look at New York City, many enterprises have like these incredible fortress environments, these strongly robust cybersecurity programs. And in New York, we recognize that, we learn from that, but we think we need to bring some aspect of better defense to each person that walks our street. How did we do that? We did two things. It's called our NYC Secure Initiative. We've delivered for free a threat detection mobile app. A threat detection mobile app that you can download for free that helps you understand if your device is experiencing abnormal activity. And everywhere where the public can access free publicly available Wi-Fi, that's protected by a DNS security solution called Quad 9. So what we're trying to do is make sure that it's not just an enterprise mission, but each person who interacts with our city, who walks our street, also experiences a level of cybersecurity.
Excellent. Sean, if you may, if you could give we'll come back to that shortly. I just want to get perspectives from each of you, and then we'll get detail.
Absolutely, and I think Geoff has given a great perspective from a municipal government approach and what they're doing for the citizens. Rather than looking at a cross-agency view, I think I'd like to give my opening comments on a cross-technology view. I was very pleased to hear your very expansive approach to the term cyber, to include social media and other aspects. And I want to expand that even further to artificial intelligence and distributed ledger systems. For me, the cybersecurity threat landscape and solution space are going to be playing out at those synergies between the different emerging technologies. I spent a long time with the federal government looking at cyber threats ranging from foreign state actors to extremist groups to criminals. And whether we're talking about ransomware and for-profit activities that we've seen plague a number of municipalities as well as corporate interests, and some of those are coming to major litigations now in different jurisdictions, or genuine denial of services and disruptions, as we've seen, for example, with the Ukrainian power grid, and as the federal national governments in both the United States and the United Kingdom have acknowledged, our critical infrastructures have been penetrated and held at risk by foreign actors. I'm very interested in the evolution of these technologies, especially as we move towards smart cities and hyper-connected environments in urban centers. As we increasingly move to an Internet of Things that's powered by 5G technologies and registered through IPv6 domain names, we're going to have a hyper-connected, intercommunicating system that's going to run day to day without humans overseeing every transaction. There'll still be humans in the loop helping manage the system and helping program and train the algorithms through data tagging and other things. And I know we're going to talk about AI later today on other panels and some of those aspects. But a lot of our future is going to be automated and autonomous systems. We're going to see that increasingly in transportation networks where driverless vehicles are communicating with their environment, other vehicles, the road itself, features in the urban landscape through which they're transiting. We're going to see that not only in the transportation sector, we're going to see increasingly complex energy grid systems where information is going to be coming between devices and apparatuses installed in companies and residences, interacting with the local grid and with the larger regional grids. And those bidirectional flows of information that are based on coming out of nodes which are designed initially for functionality and not necessarily for security, and then are emplaced by individuals who may not be technically inclined security experts. I want to give a cautionary word about this future that's coming, but I don't want to be a naysayer. I'm not a Luddite who's trying to prevent this future. I'm acknowledging what's coming and the immense economic and social benefits we're going to get from it. But I think we need to approach it with an understanding that malicious actors and genuine glitches could have deleterious impacts. And for me, it's going to be those connections where you have automated, AI-driven cyber attacks being propagated by criminals coming after these networks. On the defensive side, we're going to have great capabilities to start using blockchain or distributed ledgers for logistics information and to confirm the provenance and integrity of data. You know, a lot of folks talk about data as the new oil. When we did Global Dream Forum in London, we spoke with one of the gentlemen from The Economist who did that cover story 2 years back. I think about data as seawater. It's ubiquitous on the planet, yet it doesn't help quench your thirst or help with your hydration until you've purified it. Okay? Not all data is created equal, and we're going to increasingly be in a world where malicious implants of data could cause problems as we bridge across technologies and infrastructures. So how are we at a municipal, a state, and a federal, and even a global level going to ensure the integrity of this information that's driving all these systems? So I'm definitely not opposed to the implementation of these technologies. I'm a fan of some of the discussions going about increasing the security of these products as they're developed, and I know they're increasing efforts both in industry and in academia towards that end and in policy circles. But what I really want to draw our attention to is not only the great work being done at the policy level across a range of different federal, state, local entities, but looking ahead to where these different technologies are going to interconnect, the possible challenges we'll face there, and how we can work together to ensure that we're maintaining the integrity of data and the effectiveness, security, and safety of these systems as they become the future of our cities and even our suburban and rural environments as well. So I think that's what I want to highlight in my opening comments, Darren.
Excellent. Neal, if you may, from the financial services industry perspective.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I was going to start with sort of a description of what I do as a Chief Information Security Officer at a GSIB, globally systemically important bank, part of the GSIFI connection. In that respect, I'm basically responsible for the cyber and information security for UBS. But I was also struck at when Geoff was describing what he does as a CISO. What's important to me, it sounded like what's important to Geoff. Now, his stakeholder group is considerably different, his geographic boundary is quite a bit different than for a global bank. But in terms of what's important to him, what he sees, what I interpreted from his remarks, waking up every day and what he thinks, this is what I really got to do today. This is what's important to me. These are the values that I'm trying to defend. There was a lot of overlap. So you mentioned privacy. And if you go back to the old construct of cybersecurity and information security, it's about assuring confidentiality, integrity, and availability. You know, the triad that everyone who's ever switched on a computer and thought, should I be doing this, has thought through in their life. So confidentiality. You know, privacy is important to Geoff. Privacy is important to in his constituents. It's critical to me too. I mean, banks are supposed to be delivering privacy to their clients. Our clients expect it. Our regulators expect it, and I think the public expects it too. So that's important. Availability, providing services, making sure that things work. That's also very important to me too. We want to make sure that cybersecurity doesn't impose more problems than it solves. That through security and the necessary thoughtfulness that goes into that, that the system still works and our services are available to our clients and to, of course, the rest of the bank and to all of our main stakeholders, but also so that our services are available to the financial system. I mentioned that UBS is one of many banks, a handful of banks actually, that are global systemically important banks. That means that they have a role in supporting the global financial system. Yes, to be sure, they're clients, but a broader role, a broader obligation to the globe and to industry and to society. And that's where I want to make sure, from the integrity perspective, not only our data has integrity, that our financial statements are sound, client accounts are sound, that the data has not been corrupted, but also that we are doing our part to help maintain and keep at the highest level the integrity of the global financial system. It's not just about privacy, it's also about trust. And that to me is very important as well.
Excellent. Let me actually work backwards here because your last point, Neal, is obviously very fresh in mind, and then we'll come back, moving right here. We talk here about global threats, and one of the most eminent or possible is really around perception, particularly around a global financial crisis. If you're in the financial services industry, if there was a financial crash that occurred, which had nothing necessarily to do with a cyber attack or a cyber incident, but it was then amplified by cyber activity, how far are you and the whole financial services industry ready for this type of situation? So you can simulate all you like, but these sort of known unknowns, if you like, are potentially possible, whether it be from a state actor, a corporate actor, or otherwise. How ready is the financial services industry, and how ready are governments to hold your hand and make sure things are under control in these unforeseen, unknown circumstances?
Well, to answer your last question first, I think that they are ready. I think that we have not only an obligation through regulators, but an obligation for what our role is in the globe to work closely with the public sector, with our colleagues, and also to span across industries.
Yeah.
There are many lessons I can take from my colleagues in the financial services industry. There are many lessons I can take from government at multiple levels. I'm very happy to work in New York City. It's a good city. And there's lessons here that I can take for my job, even though I don't serve the same constituency that Geoff and his team do. So I think that the partnership is good. Are we ready for what? You'd have to be more specific on the what, and we could spin scenarios until the cows come home. And that's also part of my job as in terms of cyber threat intelligence, is what could happen and what would that mean? And this is a conversation that I and several of my colleagues across the financial services sector across the world are having with governments and with regulators in the US and the UK and Singapore and Hong Kong and Europe and Switzerland, you name it. This is a question, are we ready and how do we know? Now, what specifically goes into that differs, institution by institution. But it's a broader question we're all considering, are we ready to deal with either a cyber-enabled big shock or a shock that is exacerbated by something that I'm responsible for defending against? And it's not just, the question is, are you ready? How do you know? I won't go into specifics, but I believe that I and my colleagues are doing what we should be doing and doing everything we can, and that includes, going back to your latter point, is working very closely with our public sector colleagues, with specialists that do something similar across different industries, and understanding, what can the cyber threat do, what can an attack do, and what can we do to mitigate all risks?
And even within the financial services industry, are you seeing that level of collaboration between banks?
Yes,
absolutely.
No, I can point you.
Despite the competitive,
I can point you to any number of formal institutions. The Financial Services Information Sharing Analysis Council, the FSISAC.
Yep.
FSISAC there are a lot of ISACs. You can go back to
Sure.
ED 63 and the PSIP back in the late 90s and understand the evolution of these. But every industry, most industries have an ISAC, and FSISAC is quite effective, and that's a formal mechanism.
Yep.
For sharing information. That said, I know and am personal friends with a lot of my counterparts at banks. Some of them are career mentors. It's no accident that I ended up in the financial services sector, because some of these people, this is where I learned to be a CISO, if you will. And we communicate. We see it as in our mutual interests and an obligation to the broader system and to society that we constantly trade notes. We try to understand what the risks are and then manage them all together.
Got it. Just very briefly, a follow-up. Within Europe in particular, as you know, where GDPR regulation has come in very recently, there seems to be a view, and this may be a bit critical, whereby data breaches are the center of thinking from a board level due to the fines that are incurred on a very short-sighted perspective. And therefore, particularly in the consumer domain, less so in the B2B, but particularly consumer. And therefore, you're seeing strategies coming out of boards or CEOs who are not necessarily cyber specialists or cyber savvy to think, how do they mitigate this, any potential breaches and the fines associated, rather, as if you like, plugging the holes rather than fixing the big issues. You work for a European bank, fundamentally, obviously regulated here in New York City as well. Do you see that perspective at all? Do you see, when you speak to your C-suite, are they fully plugged in and aware of the strategic importance of this issue? Not just the CTO, but we're talking CEO, chairman, board members who have their fiduciary duties. Or are they very tactical in their thinking and thinking, all right, we just need to prevent bad headlines around data breaches and the like?
Right. So I feel comfortable that I have regular communications with my board of directors, and of course there's the group board of directors, and we have legal entities throughout the world.
Sure.
And I am in regular contact with them, and so I'm very confident that I have what I believe, not what an objective standard, but what I personally believe is the right level of communication and back and forth. I want to hear what they're concerned about, and I want to tell them what I'm concerned about, what I think they should be concerned about. I am also extremely confident that they take this very seriously, and not just because the regulators said so, although the regulators do say so. But the regulators have the same thing at heart in interest that we do, which is protecting the privacy and confidentiality of our clients and their data. What the regulators think is a good idea, I think is a good idea if that's the common goal, right? And it is.
Yeah.
So, yes, boards, not just in VNFS, but boards increasingly, when they have personally identifiable information or whatever type of information that comes back to a citizen, and I would expect that Geoff has very similar experiences here too, even though it's a different industry. There is an obligation that society has decided to impose on the stewards of this type of information that you should probably be very careful with it and take due caution. I can tell you my board of directors believes that, and they take this very seriously.
Geoff, coming back to you, that's sort of perfect in there. Talking about what I alluded to earlier in our sort of pre-panel discussion around best practice and about coordination. And I know you spoke about some of the key themes here in the city, but I think that's really, really critical that those who are not in the cyber domain understand increasingly the strategic importance and the tactical importance of dealing with the cyber threat. But I think there is a concern that, if you like, those key stakeholders are not necessarily in position to respond accordingly. It's not for lack of expertise, but maybe more for sort of infrastructural setup. So if you could talk to how robust the, if you like, interworkings of agencies are and what you're doing in New York City to drive national and even international best practice, and where else you see best practice around the world, if there is any to talk of.
Sure. So I think there's a couple themes here that answer this question in a confident way. So Neal pointed out something that I really, really liked. And what was it, Neal? You said a moment ago, it's like, how do you know, right? How do you know? That's a big piece, and I'll come back to that in a moment in answering your question. So the coordination in a municipality, let me highlight. In New York City, as we all know, sitting here today, we have New York City Emergency Management, we have the fire department for the city of New York, we have the police department, we have all these strong apparatus. And this strong apparatus has worked in private and public partnership before to manage crisis. Think about a major storm event. And all of the components of city government that come together with the private sector to keep New Yorkers safe. Those very components are the very things that give us confidence in how we are resilient to the types of impact that come no matter the causality. That could be cyber, that could be weather, that could be an operational issue, that could be a different type of threat. All of these components are practice components. And one of the things that us in the cyber discipline need to do is integrate like our perspective, our representation of risk into that whole enterprise risk calculation and all the means whereby the apparatus, whether private, public, no matter what vertical you're in, all the means whereby the apparatus practices to manage that risk. I think when it comes down to it, it's, are you prepared? The question that you got a moment ago, Neal. Are you prepared? Yes, but you can say you're prepared because you practice for the impact. Right now, the most interesting thing, and to your question, there's so many different aspects, so many different ways of highlighting the threat landscape and the various mitigating controls, operational, technical, organization, process, that's out there. There's a lot of knowledge in the space. But what I'm seeing, and this is very encouraging, is a big piece of the conversation is now going to how do you as an enterprise absorb the inevitability of some type of impact, cyber being in causality. How do you absorb that and make sure that the things that you hold dearest, your core functions, in the parlance of the current Department of Homeland Security nomenclature, your core functions, make sure those run. and run in a way where you're confident that the delivery of services, whether it's to a constituency in the financial services, a different type of industry or a municipality, those core services are delivered. That's where the conversation is in cybersecurity right now. I found that incredibly encouraging for two quick reasons. You spoke a moment ago in your opening remarks about the expansion of technology and how that can be seen as an optimistic thing. I 100% agree. I think we can be optimistic as long as it's deployed safely. In order to be deployed safely, what's the failure rate and what is the comeback recovery of that technology and that service? That's what people are talking about now. I think the conversation is at the right tempo, it's at the right place. We just have to maybe work more concertedly on the solutions to thwart those bad actors out there that will always try to stymie what we're trying to deliver to our constituents.
In terms of international best practice, do you see anything? Do you deal with that, with other cities around the world, London, Paris, Singapore? What do you see? Is there interaction there? Does there need to be interaction, or is it more informal, formal? Your fellow CISOs.
So I think one, yes, there is interaction. Two, yes, does there need to be more? And three, I'd say there's great models of interaction out there. Something like the FSI Act that was highlighted earlier is a global sort of financial sector information sharing community that has a lot of sort of the underpinnings of formality that's necessary for those professional relationships and that technical sharing. There are many different forums. We as a city speak with other cities. My cybersecurity program speaks with other cybersecurity programs. There are best practices, but I think one thing that we're really proud about in the city is something that I always advocate for other municipalities, and that's to marry your intent to consolidate the process and the people around your cybersecurity risk team, marry those with the authorities to have technical consolidation and how they're adjudicating the mission. Because in the end, cybersecurity is a security discipline, but also a technical discipline. So you won't be able to really comprehensively field a defense if you're doing it only by policy. You have to also do it technically.
Okay. Now let me ask you a hard question. If you were to wake up at 6 a.m. tomorrow morning and the electricity grid of New York City is down, very likely due to a cyber attack, what do you do?
Well,
what's the process? What's the response? Sure. How do you mobilize?
Sure.
This will be,
so there's
emergency. But go for it. Yeah.
No.
What's the protocol?
So there's two things. The first thing I think I'd have to highlight very quickly is the power does go out in New York City sometimes.
Yeah, but a wide, completely, what seems to be an intent by intent, rather than unintentional.
I understand, but the thing that I have to highlight, it does go out, and this is a good thing to think about with a cyber context, because it goes to my comments of a moment ago. The power goes out, and the best of New York comes out. And that's part of our resiliency. That's part of our absorption rate.
Yep.
You have the police department, you have the utility workers, you have everybody working to not just get the power back on, but to make sure that the streets are safe and transitable. Like, this works, right?
Okay.
The city's proven that we can absorb that.
So adding another element, by 7 a.m., it's a nefarious state-powered cyber attack.
So I'll highlight two things. One, on that specific example, though thinking about a utility is important. Con Edison is one of our partners in the power space. I highlight them specifically because they are part of something that we call in the city Cyber Critical Services and Infrastructure, which is a public-private working group that we formed. We spoke about this a few weeks ago at the Manhattan DA Cybersecurity and Fraud Summit. We all sat and we talked about Cyber Critical Services and Infrastructure, this working group. We've gone to training together, we've done simulations together, we've done live cyber simulations together, and the key is to get those communication channels running, and the operating principle that my organization will always bring to that conversation, where we're trying to say, what do we have things that you need to help stand that back up, to understand what's going on. The key that we will bring to that is a simple equation that my organization revolves around. That's facts plus judgment plus culture equals trust. That's what we bring all the time to a conversation. At that 7 a.m. moment, probably what we're doing is trying to make sure we're obtaining facts. We're obtaining facts. That's what our police department counterparts and partners would be doing. We're trying to offer support if that's necessary. But in your power analogy, that is part of a public-private partnership because the power is in the power apparatus, the infrastructure, is one of our partners, not something that's directly under the technical controls of the city government.
Let me add to this. 8 a.m., financial services industry has issued. Payments are down. Things are happening. This is not good. We have an escalation. We've gone from energy utilities to a financial services threat. So you get the picture. So, and you're in an escalation situation.
Sure.
What do? Do you turn around and say, all right, we're going to do everything we can, but this is quickly becoming a federal issue? Or, you firefight? What would you do? You can see a rolling escalation.
Sure. So on both of those scenarios, I'll highlight and then maybe pass to Neal. In both of those scenarios, if cyber is a causality, certainly the federal government, not speaking on their behalf, but knowledgeable via our partnership, Department of Homeland Security and other apparatuses would be quite interested and have various mechanisms to field support and partnership. But maybe pass over to Neal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think this goes back to an earlier point that we discussed, which is the public-private partnership, which is very important. And this is an on-the-ground example of the importance of that. And ideally, we should all be talking with each other before something bad happens.
Sure.
Jeff and I have each other's email, and we see each other every once in a while, and we don't wait for the doomsday to happen before we do that, because then we're both really busy. It's just hard to get together at that point. But what's important, I think, is to have that communication beforehand, and then once it happens, then you look to some of the mechanisms that we discussed earlier, FSISAC. And you try to understand, what's going on and what's my role. But I think communication is really the important thing here, not only within appropriate bounds, of course, but communicating with FBI, with Secret Service, if that's the right thing, with the federal government, with DHS, with FSISAC, with regulators, with clients. When at some point it might be appropriate to start communicating to the clients, to the public, and to the media to help explain what's going on and being as transparent as possible. But most importantly, not just saying what you know, but saying what you don't know. And being very fact-based in terms of prognostications, so that you help everyone understand what's going on. But my emphasis would be that partnership starts before a crisis. That partnership starts now.
Public confidence will be key, Geoff, coming back to this, and the whole communication strategy and maintaining that resilience, robustness in the populace. Absolutely critical in a unforeseen situation like this. Do you have that whole sort of protocol in place? I'm sure you do, but is that tested? Is it, ready to, be put into place and action in such a circumstance?
I certainly think that as seen in any event in the city, the sort of communication apparatus, the regular communication through all kinds of vehicles is at play in your scenario. Yeah. And so I have an incredible amount of confidence that City Hall, as the lead for the city government, would be 100% in the conversation and making sure New Yorkers knew what they would need to know to be calm and to understand the situation.
Got it. Sean, you've worked in the White House before. You've taken the federal view. What is your take here on how robust and resilient this discussion is about this issue, and what the practical realities would be?
Certainly, I support the comments of my two co-panelists. I think that their comments represent the evolution of thinking over the past 5-10 years on these kind of issues. And the two catchphrases or words I think that are the right takeaways are risk management and resilience. You're never going to have a perfectly secure system. I think I alluded to how complex our future technology environment is going to be. To expect to never have a single glitch or problem is silly. We have those glitches and problems in our electric grid, as we've already discussed, whether it's animals eating through power lines or weather issues. Those actually help us exercise our remediation efforts. And some of the same processes for getting linkages and services back up in a natural situation also support getting systems back up in a man-made, malevolent environment. But resilience, I think, is the other important word, and it goes to planning, strategizing, communicating well before the fact. The example you've offered, Darren, is one that has probably been discussed and planned in numerous jurisdictions and in combined federal, state, local events many times a year in, let's say, the last 5 years as we got more attuned to these problems. And while the exact fact pattern may not duplicate what might happen at 7 a.m. one morning, what you have in place is communication channels with the infrastructure providers and the government entities. You have remediation plans, and remember, resilience is going to be at the enterprise or organization level. To actually get the power back on, that's going to be getting done by the power company. It can be facilitated by government. Public trust and confidence can be supported by a communication plan from the government. And of course, public safety can be supported by first responders if it actually is a concern of life and limb. But resilience of actually restoring services is largely, in this country, going to be at private sector entities, even if they're regulated utilities, but they're going to be private entities. So appreciating that that's where the actual solution will come from. But again, public trust and confidence is incredibly important, and that's where the government can be very supportive. And I think what you've seen is this effort at all tiers of government. If the solution is actually to be local, but the federal support and setting up the channels and the communications, we've alluded to the FSI-SAC. Both Neal and I in previous years have worked with the FSI-SAC and helped them set up something else called the Financial Systemic Analysis Resilience Center, which is actually an ability for those financial institutions to communicate with one another and with the federal government, DHS, through DHS as the appropriate touch point, to share robust information that could be of use in predicting threats and in remediating problems. And you even see one of the Trump administration's early executive orders paved the way for that kind of communication to make sure there wasn't any concerns of anti-competitiveness. So at the very high policy level, you need the structure for that kind of communication. Then you need it to be exercised and practiced regularly well in advance of the event. And you talked about, a situation fomenting, a cyber situation fomenting a financial crisis. That's not purely hypothetical. Several years back, we had a hack of the Associated Press's Twitter account that produced falsified information that actually led to a fluctuation in the financial markets. After about 5 minutes, the 140 points in the Dow Jones came back into the marketplace. But that was all based on a false information about an explosion at the White House. So we've seen disinformation or hacking-based misinformation affect the financial services. So it's not purely hypothetical. Folks have taken notice of that, and they've worked on their remediation strategies and their response strategies. So just like a fire team practices with different kinds of scenarios, CISOs and remediation teams practice and prepare. I think we're in a much better position nationally and globally than we were 10 years ago or even 5 years ago when I was leading threat analysis for the federal government and the intelligence community. Is there always room for improvement? Yes, but I'm actually going to come back to one other thing that Geoff said. In this risk management approach, you need to identify your most critical services, those relating to public safety, health first, others related to public confidence in critical infrastructures like the financial system or the electric grid, to understand that if there is a temporary outage or temporary implication, it will be managed and resolved and brought back online. That is one of the strengths in the American infrastructure and in our resilience. So I'd like to highlight those points.
Excellent, Sean. Two quick questions for you, and then this will go to both the other panelists. If an organization, which is perhaps to be based in New York, a company, a corporation, came under attack internationally across multiple jurisdictions. I'm thinking here the Columbia Pictures Sony issue, which obviously not based here, but and the North Korea hack and similar scenarios. And I'm thinking how exposed an organization like the NBA is right now, and there are many others who are geopolitically exposed. How responsible, or I should say, how would you react to that? As a stakeholder, it's not your ultimate responsibility or customer, but there's certainly a stakeholder. Are you going to be there as the New York City CISO, head of cyber command on the end of the phone, giving them comfort, supporting them? Or are you going to have to say, we've communicated all of our policies and protocols. This is over to you. If you need to sort this out, you've got to get a private sector vendor in, et cetera, if their team isn't able to handle and identify this. Or as Neal said, they'll be talking obviously to the different agencies, et cetera. But, what is the sense of responsibility there in creating that sense of integrity, resilience, robustness in key corporations? And that obviously also goes down to the individual level, but such as a political candidate. But we won't go there right now, but it's an example. So could you give some thoughts on that?
So I think what's important to highlight here is something that's core to my organization and how we think about our mission set. So this also ties into the partnerships that's necessary. Cyber is often called a team sport, and it is. My organization thinks about it in a very certain way. We care about the how of an attack. In that scenario, if it's a private sector entity and enterprise, they have their own mechanisms, and the mechanisms to deal, to defend, to respond, and they have, as a private sector organization, the necessity to deal with the consequences of whether they've been successful in how they prepare to respond, right? So I have to deal with those consequences. What I will care about is understanding the how. Because when I understand the how, I can take that learning and apply it to the defenses of the enterprise of the city government of New York. With that said, I have a great partner who cares about the who, and that's my great partner in law enforcement in NYPD, right? NYPD cares about the who, and so do many other law enforcement entities that have other types of authorities and leverage to assist that impacted entity. Okay.
And even if that's a New York-based entity with an international presence, which is seeing threats internationally, would their definition of how they help the who, how far does that go, if you like?
So I think that's up to each private sector entity. I mean, when it comes down to it, all of us, all my co-panelists, we've all been involved in the robust conversation. I have nothing but genuine confidence in the fact that people in our seats have the mission focus of our enterprises, but also the mission focus of the cybersecurity community, top of mind. So for the most part, each enterprise has to decide whether or not they want to engage in that who conversation. But I know, having been at the table with many of those conversations in the past, the numbers are all known, the characters are all known, people know each other in the community. And if a company asks for help from many different directions, the help will be given.
Now, if we're in a situation which could well pass where the US competitive strength in technology diminishes somewhat, and we see other countries having strength in technologies that Sean has alluded to, such as AI and quantum computing, and obviously China comes to mind, there may be some others, how does that affect things in terms of your ability to serve and to protect? Is that something that you feel, and both of you can speak to this, but maybe Sean first.
Yeah, I think I can help a little bit here. The minute you go to the global level, you're dealing with two issues. The first is this ex-post law enforcement effort, and there are efforts underway through the Cloud Act and other federal legislation to work on cooperative law enforcement measures that go beyond the existing mutual legal assistance treaties that have taken a lot of time to sometimes fulfill the requests either direction. What you have seen in the past, of course, is malicious actors who intentionally route their exploitative activities through jurisdictions that do not have cooperative legal agreements, knowing that'll be an impasse for the ex-post law enforcement. At the same time that you have the law enforcement side, the feedback lesson learned cycle that Geoff alluded to is also very important for future preventative activities and capacity building. That's the other half of this, is to make sure that the same exploit or attack can't harm other entities or can't be repurposed in the future. So you see cooperation with industry. If we look back to the WannaCry event, Microsoft was very active in, at its own expense, helping the world patch something which the world had already been warned was no longer being serviced but was later exploited, and they assisted in helping clean the ecosystem. So at the industry level, at the international partner level, you have efforts underway, imperfect albeit, but improving. But to get to the other aspect of your question, what if you actually have adverse or competitive nation states who are looking for that cooperative assistance at times?
Yeah.
On the emerging technology side, quantum...
And as an example, encryption, for one thing, where they actually have a strength, this has been talked about in the past few days, where through quantum computing expertise and potentially superiority, they have the ability to encrypt in a greater way, or at least protect themselves from encryption or expose
here
current
the
networks.
terms of art are important. Quantum cryptography refers to the ability to do quantum key exchange,
Sure.
so you have the ability to do a secure communication knowing that the key that's being exchanged cannot be eavesdropped on. Quantum computing itself refers to a new processing capacity based on qubits
Yep.
that in the future will have the ability to probably do large-scale decryption of traditionally encrypted communications. So both of those will be game changers, but those are probably years off. The Chinese lead in QKD, quantum key distribution. They have that proof of concept. They've actually done it from satellite-based platforms to terrestrial. But as far as wide-scale application, that's a little far off, and quantum computing is even further.
Yeah.
What I think you do need to focus on here at the global level is 5G technology.
Yep.
You're going to be
And we have a
facing-
panel on that imminently later.
and
today.
absolutely, it's really important because you're going to see a situation in the coming years where the main data processors, the cloud computing entities, are largely North American in origin, the main three, and the leading 5G providers, people who are doing the transport of that data value, are European and Asian. So are we going to find ourselves in standoffs between data owners and data transfers? Are you going to see extraterritorial application of policy and law? That's where I'm particularly concerned in reaching cooperative agreements for law enforcement collaboration in the future. I think that's a real place to look, and I hope your panel
Neal,
addresses that.
yeah, no, absolutely. Neal, just coming back to you here. Coming back to threats, what is the one thing that keeps you up at night, if anything, around,
My neighbors.
other than that? You're a cyber threat there. No, and I don't know who your neighbors are, but we'll come back to that. But no, really, what is the one thing that really, when you most fear when you go into work in the morning that has happened and that you feel may be out of your skill set and control?
I mean, I sleep pretty well if I believe that I've done everything that I should be doing and I've done it to the best of my ability.
Yeah.
Because, and this is something that Geoff touched on directly, and Sean knows intimately, which is the importance of cyber threat intelligence. And if you've spent any time with cyber threat intelligence specialists and you read, threat intelligence bulletins, whether they're internally generated or generated by producers of these, you realize how rapidly the threats can change. The hows can change within 3 weeks. And the who's change, because going back to your earlier point about technology supremacy and pace of innovation, the barrier to entry for a lot of things we're talking about is very low. It does not take advanced technology, but the way that they use this technology changes quite rapidly. Technology does progress, and with progression sometimes comes security and vulnerabilities, security flaws and vulnerabilities, and the barrier to entry is low enough so that you have new groups pop up. You have old groups that come up with new and innovative ways to attack, or sometimes groups that were attacking this industry decide to attack this industry. So not knowing what the future holds is what most concerns me, because the threat changes so rapidly and so effectively. They don't change incrementally. Now that said, what scenario most concerns me? I mean, given our obligation to our clients, but also our obligation to the financial system, both of those, the most sophisticated threats are the ones that concern me the most, but also the ones that would want to affect wide swaths of the sector or multiple sectors for two reasons. One, because the cascading challenges there would be much more difficult than just one institution being targeted. Two, the type of actor you're likely to get to have that kind of impact is likely to be quite sophisticated. And that's now you're talking about multiple stakeholders involved, which no matter how well you communicate, always presents a bit of a coordination challenge. So those are the types of scenarios that I think are always worth paying very close attention to, in addition to every other threat profile and every other vulnerability that you have, which can never escape your mind.
Got it. Sean, one point, and then Geoff, I want you to finish out here with the...
Yeah, Neal had a enjoyable but also pressing comment with his word neighbors. In the virtual world, knowing who your neighbors are and where your cross-sectoral dependencies are that can lead to those cascading effects is actually really important. I know the cyber insurance sector is spending a lot of time trying to analyze that, because an organization or an administration may do a great job in protecting its own institution, but if it's dependent on other utilities, providers, customers, et cetera, for intercommunication, if they themselves are not secure managing the risk well, it can have effects beyond their own organization. So I actually do lose sleep about my neighbors in a cyber risk management sense, because you don't always know who they are and how well they're protecting themselves, even though it can affect you as well.
I meant the ones playing Metallica at 2 a.m, but I'll take that one too.
Yeah, absolutely. Very interesting. Geoff, where are we going to be 5 years from now? Are we going to be, if we convene, as we will be doing on a regular basis, Global Dream Forum across the US, internationally, if we were sat here in 5 years, and assuming you're still CISO and head of New York City Cyber Command, but you may well be somewhere even grander, but where are we going to be? Are we going to be sat here with the same sort of confidence, robust posture of we've got it all under control, and we're going to take care of this, we've got the resilience, robustness, and integrity to our thinking and to our actions? Or are we going to be in a situation where we've just come out of the boxing ring and we're in the 11th round and we've been knocked down too many times to say that?
So I'm going to give you an optimistic answer because this is what I believe. What I'm seeing in the landscape, despite the continued complexity of technology, the evolution of threat, what I am seeing is a coalescing of intent. The intent is to be successful as network defenders, to be successful as service providers, no matter what your type of vertical is. I see a lot of maturity emerging when it comes to where the conversations are happening, whether that be federal, state, local, international, private sector. The conversations are happening in places where people have decision authority. That means things are getting done. That is positive. The negative, and rightfully so, the concerns that Neal and Sean highlighted, those are like concerns, and those concerns will be played out over the next 5 years. But to your question, and perhaps this is another piece of optimism, to your question about what keeps me up at night, I have a very simple answer. And we all know the answer to this question. The answer is New York City is the city that never sleeps.
So in 5 years' time, we're going to be in a stronger, more robust, resilient posture, or are we coming back to that again? Where I get your New York City never sleeps, but are we going to be in a better place than we are now, or is this you talk about maturity and evolution? You're confident that we're going to be there. And bear in mind, I'm thinking of the international context here, where cooperation and ideologies are fast moving, and we may not get the type of collaboration that you're seeing today. So is that, you truly have that confidence? If that optimism is there, please maintain it. But just as a final word.
No, I very much am confident. And let me give you one more concrete reason. My confidence is not rooted in a naive expectation that impacts won't happen. My confidence is rooted in the optimism that impacts will happen, and we will deal with those impacts, and we will improve our posture systematically, as we always do.
Excellent. Well, that's a very positive way to finish. Thank you so much to the panelists. That was an excellent start to the day, and we look forward to welcoming you back and all your stakeholders in the very near future. Please give a round of applause.
Help me find a spot to chart. Thanks. I'm just reading stuff.
This one right here.
Oh, that's cool. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Hi. Following on that fascinating presentation on cybersecurity, we're now going to delve more, I think, into some of the more social aspects, the job impacts of new technology, how AI is sort of infiltrating all aspects of everyday life. The panel here consists of Dr. Ramesh Srinivasan. He's a professor at the UCLA's Department of Information Studies and director of the UC Digital Cultures Lab. He has a book coming out called Beyond the Valley, which is a look at how digital technologies are being used to benefit and change the work and the lifestyle of a large part of the population. Our next panelist is Dr. Elizabeth Cobbs. She teaches world history at Texas A&M University, and she recently wrote and co-produced a documentary called Cyberworks and the American Dream. And she has told others, not me, but I read about that she sees that documentary as a way to show how history can be used to